Back then, the skies above Europe weren't blue. They were blackened with smoke, tracer fire, and the endless echo of engines that never seemed to stop. The year was 1943, and the air war had reached a fever pitch. Day after day, the flying fortresses of the U.S. 8th Air Force thundered over occupied France and deep into the heart of Germany, their silver bellies glinting in the sunlight, like a swarm of angry hornets challenging the very gods of war. Among them was one ship, B-17F Wulf Hound, serial number 4124585, a name that would soon haunt both sides of the conflict. She was a proud bird of the 303rd Bomb Group out of Molesworth, England, flown by Lieutenant Harold Sparks and his crew of 10 young men who'd barely begun to live. They were the sons of farmers, mechanics, and small-town dreamers, boys who'd grown up staring at the clouds, never imagining they'd one day live among them. On the morning of December 12, 1942, the mission was simple: hit the German submarine pens at Rouen. But war has a way of laughing at plans. Flak burst like thunder around them, and the Luftwaffe came screaming down from the sun. Yellow-nosed Messerschmitts and silver Focke-Wulfs cutting through the formation like wolves among sheep. Sparks fought to hold formation, but the fortress shuddered, engines coughing black smoke, oxygen lines cut, and men shouting through the intercom, their voices laced with panic and fire. 2 engines were gone, the right wing leaking fuel, and the sky, the endless sky, had turned into a cage of fire. Sparks did the only thing he could. He turned east, away from England, away from home, toward Germany. The crew thought he'd lost his mind, but there was method in the madness. He hoped to reach neutral Switzerland. But fate had other plans. 40 minutes later, the Wulf Hound limped across the German border, smoke trailing like a funeral banner. The crew bailed one by one, parachutes blooming like white flowers against the dark clouds. All except Sparks and his co-pilot. They stayed, riding the dying bird down. When the fortress hit the frozen ground near Leeuwarden in the Netherlands, it skidded, groaned, and came to rest half buried in mud and silence. German soldiers surrounded it like ants around a carcass. The mighty flying fortress had fallen, intact. Its guns, its radios, its engines, everything the Reich's engineers had longed to study lay in their hands. The Luftwaffe officers who arrived that later day couldn't believe their eyes. Major Wolfgang von Stetten, a test pilot from Rechlin, walked around the wreck in awe, whispering under his breath, "Mein Gott, this is not a bomber. This is a machine from another world." They'd captured P-47s before, even a few P-51 prototypes, but never a fortress in this condition. To them, it was like capturing a dragon alive. They towed the B-17 back to Rechlin under heavy guard. For weeks, mechanics swarmed over it, cleaning, repairing, repainting. Soon, the swastika flew where the American stars had once been. But inside, beneath the German markings, the heart of America still beat. A fortress of steel, rivets, and sheer willpower. When the engines finally roared back to life again, the sound rolled across the airfield like thunder. The Germans called it Der Fliegende Festung, the Flying Fortress. They would soon discover just how fitting that name truly was. And when the Luftwaffe pilots, men who'd flown the best the Reich could offer, climbed aboard that American beast for the first time, they realized something that chilled them to the bone. No German bomber, no Heinkel, no Dornier, no Junkers, not one, could ever match this. They didn't know it yet, but the fortress they had captured would not only reveal the secrets of Allied engineering, it would break their faith in their own.
For weeks, the captured fortress sat on the icy tarmac at Rechlin, her American olive-drab skin now cloaked in Luftwaffe markings. Black crosses replacing white stars, the Iron Cross painted proudly on her tail. But beneath that paint, she was still all Yankee heart and stubbornness. The German engineers approached her with a mixture of fascination and reverence, like archaeologists uncovering an ancient relic. They opened every panel, every compartment, running their hands along the gun turrets, the bomb bay doors, the self-sealing fuel tanks. "So that's how they survived so long up there," one mechanic muttered, tracing the thick, rubberized layers inside the tanks. Major von Stetten and his fellow test pilot, Oberleutnant Hans-Werner Lerche, took notes obsessively. The Americans, they realized, had built this machine not to fly, but to endure. Every rivet screamed of purpose. Every gun mount was positioned like a chess piece on a battlefield. There were no blind spots. The Germans had seen bombers before, of course. The Heinkel 111, the Dornier 217, the U-88. Elegant machines, fast and efficient, but fragile. The B-17 was something else entirely. It was as if the Americans had designed her to take the punishment of the gods themselves and keep flying. On January 15, 1943, the test flight began. A cold dawn hung over Rechlin as von Stetten climbed into the left seat. His breath fogged the frosted glass as he looked across the vast cockpit. Dials everywhere, American labels, strange instruments, and that smell of oil, leather, and cold aluminum. He settled his gloved hands on the yoke, glanced at Lerche, and nodded. The engines coughed once, twice, then thundered alive, one by one, until the entire airfield trembled under their growl. 4 Wright cyclones, spinning in perfect unison, sent shock waves through the hangars. Even the ground crews paused to watch. Slowly, The fortress began to roll, her wheels crunching over frost. Schwer wie ein Zug, von Stetten muttered, heavy as a train. But as she gathered speed, something unexpected happened. The weight melted away. The controls, though firm, responded with precision. She lifted, steady and sure, slicing through the winter mist like a rising god of war. The Germans had flown everything, from nimble Bf-109s to the monstrous He-177, but nothing felt quite like this. She was stable, obedient, unshakable. Even when von Stetten cut an engine, she barely flinched. Unglaublich, he whispered. Incredible. In the skies above Brandenburg, they tested everything. The climb, the stall, the turns, even mock attack runs against escort fighters. And all the while, the German officers in the observation tower watched in silence, realizing what they'd been up against all along. When they fired the defensive guns, the .5 caliber Brownings that bristled from every corner of the ship, the sheer roar of them echoed like thunder. Even hardened Luftwaffe gunners stepped back, stunned by the violence of that sound. Each weapon fed from heavy ammunition belts, spitting lead faster than their own MG-15s or 131s could dream of. The B-17 didn't just defend itself, it fought back. And as tracer rounds lanced into the empty sky, the officers began to understand why German fighter pilots often returned home shaken, their Me-109s riddled with holes, their comrades lost to defenseless bombers. There was nothing defenseless about a B-17. She was a flying fortress in every sense of the word, an armored, fire-breathing Leviathan. That evening, as the sun sank beyond the snow-dusted hangars, von Stetten stood by the aircraft, his flight cap in his hand. He said quietly to the gathered engineers, "This," he said, "is why they keep coming. This is why we cannot stop them." The others nodded, silent, staring at the captured bird now resting in twilight. For the first time, the Luftwaffe officers felt something they'd never known before: respect for the enemy's machine and a hint of fear. Because deep down they understood. The Americans weren't just building planes, they were building legends. Winter had not yet loosened its grip on Germany when the Luftwaffe decided to push the B-17 to her absolute limits. The engineers had studied her, admired her, even envied her, but now they wanted to challenge her. What could this American bomber truly do when met with the fury of German firepower? On a gray morning, with snow flurries sweeping across the runway at Rechlin, Major von Stetten stood beside the aircraft, now repainted in Luftwaffe gray, her nose art covered, her soul hidden beneath the enemy's insignia. They called her Dornröschen, Sleeping Beauty, though there was nothing sleeping about her anymore. Around her, the best of Germany's fighters assembled: Messerschmitt Bf-109Gs, Focke-Wulf 190As, the same machines that had haunted Allied bomber streams for years. Their mission today was simple: simulate an attack on the captured fortress. test her guns, measure her defensive arcs, find her weaknesses. Von Stetten and Lerche would man the controls, while a full German gunnery crew occupied her stations, each briefed on the American systems. The roar of engines shattered the cold air as the formation climbed into the clouds. Above the Baltic, sunlight broke through, a blinding sea of white and gold, and for a moment the sky seemed peaceful again. But peace was a lie. The radio crackled. Angriff beginnen. From 12 o'clock high, 3 109s dove in formation, their wings flashing silver. The fortress came alive instantly, like an awakened beast. The top turret whirled, the tail guns tracked with mechanical precision, and the first bursts of .5 caliber fire ripped through the stillness like a thunderclap. The Luftwaffe pilots in the 109s couldn't believe what they saw. Even with German crews inside, the fortress responded faster, smoother, deadlier than anything they'd trained against. Every gunner shouted over the intercom, adjusting arcs, laying down a curtain of fire that filled the sky with burning lines of lead. From the ground, observers watched as the air around the bomber turned into a storm of tracer fire, crossing, intersecting, overlapping, an invisible web of death. One of the Focke-Wulfs dove too close, and its pilot, misjudging the range, found his canopy shattered by rounds that tore through metal and flesh. He bailed out seconds later, parachute opening against the bright winter sky. Down below, even the German officers recording the data fell silent. This was not just a test, it was a revelation. The B-17's defensive network wasn't chaos, it was orchestra. Every gun position harmonized with the others, designed so that no attacker could approach without facing at least 3 streams of converging fire. And that was just one fortress. Multiply that by 20, by 50, by 100, and the sky became an unending wall of bullets. When the exercise ended, the captured bomber descended back to Rechlin, smoke trailing from her barrels, her skin peppered with the scars of mock combat. The airfield was quiet when she landed. No one cheered, no one spoke. Von Stetten climbed out, his flight suit soaked in sweat despite the freezing air. He removed his goggles, eyes red from the gun smoke, and turned to the generals who had gathered at the edge of the runway. "You asked what makes them strong?" he said, voice hoarse. "It's not their speed, not their altitude. It's this." He tapped the fuselage, the cold, battered skin of the fortress. "Teamwork, discipline, and guns. My God, the guns." He paused, staring up at the massive frame towering over him. A dozen men in one heart, and each one ready to die for the others. We've never built anything like it. That night, as reports were filed and data logged, one colonel wrote in his notes a single sentence that would echo through the Luftwaffe archives for decades. "We have no fortress. We have only aircraft." And for the first time, Germany's Air Command understood what their pilots had been saying for months, that the American sky trains they called flying fortresses were not just machines, they were miracles of coordination, courage, and relentless fire. In the weeks that followed the simulated combat, the captured fortress became an obsession. The Luftwaffe engineers called it der amerikanische Traum, the American dream, half mockery, half admiration. Every system was studied, every component dissected. They removed her .5 calibers and measured the barrel wear after thousands of rounds. They drained the fuel tanks to test the self-sealing layers, cut open her armor plating, and marveled at how weight had been distributed, not randomly, but strategically, around crew positions most likely to take fire. The Germans had long prided themselves on precision engineering, but here they found something different. Not elegance, but endurance. The B-17 was overbuilt, heavy, inefficient by their standards, and yet that imperfection made her unstoppable. Even after months of abuse, the fortress refused to die. Von Stetten often stood alone in the hangar late at night, tracing his gloved fingers across the cold aluminum skin, whispering to himself, "She was made for war, not for glory." Engineers proposed using what they'd learned to strengthen the Heinkel 177 or to design new bombers with heavier gun coverage, but the Reich's factories were already burning under the rain of Allied bombs. Ironically, it was the lessons from that captured fortress that convinced many Luftwaffe officers of their hopelessness. The Americans had thousands of these flying citadels, and more were coming every day, faster than Germany could shoot them down. Meanwhile, Rechlin's tests grew riskier. They began flying the fortress at night, testing her instruments and endurance over dark fields and frozen lakes. Once, during a midnight run, a faulty fuel line caused an engine fire, and the entire hangar crew watched in terror as the glowing silhouette of the B-17 descended through the darkness like a wounded angel. Von Stetten managed to land her, one engine gone, wings scarred, but alive. When the fire was out, he sat on the frozen ground, staring up at the still smoking machine. "Even in death, she refuses surrender," he murmured. By early 1944, the airfields around Rechlin trembled daily under Allied raids. The captured fortress was moved from hangar to hangar, hidden beneath camouflage nets to keep her from being destroyed by her own kind. But the irony was cruel. Sometimes, when the bombers came overhead, von Stetten and his men would run for cover and listen to the engines above. The same deep, rhythmic thrum as the one they'd come to know. American engines, American steel, and the bombs falling from the sky were dropped by the fortress's sisters. It was as if the ghosts of the very machine they worshipped had come to bury them. That winter, a final report was filed, stamped and signed. Defensive systems of the Boeing B-17 are unmatched. Reverse engineering not practical. Recommend strategic re-evaluation. It was the first time the Luftwaffe had formally admitted defeat in the realm of bomber design. Von Stetten read it in silence, folded the paper, and slipped it into his flight jacket. That night, he stood beside the captured aircraft one last time. Snow fell gently over the airfield, blanketing the scars of war.
He placed a hand on the nose of the fortress and whispered, "You were not built to kill. You were built to survive. And that is what we have forgotten."
By early 1944, the captured B-17 had become more than an object of study. She was a mirror reflecting everything the Luftwaffe had failed to achieve, and every failure haunted the men who touched her. Major von Stetten and Oberleutnant Lerche often sat for hours in the dim glow of hangar lamps, tracing their fingers over the dials, the turret rails, the reinforced fuselage, speaking little but thinking much, their minds burdened with the realization that no German engineer could replicate what they saw. Each test flight was a revelation. Each climb into the sky reminded them of the fortress's almost supernatural resilience. The gunner positions, once examined on paper, now revealed their terrifying efficiency. A network of deadly angles, overlapping fields of fire that could annihilate an attacking fighter before it even found the optimal strike point. During one particularly harsh trial, von Stetten attempted a Mach evasive maneuver with the FW-190s attacking, expecting to find weaknesses in the tail or nose guns. But no matter how the fighters approached, the fortress responded with near precognitive precision, her defensive firepower anticipating each vector, cutting down simulated threats with uncanny timing. The officers began to whisper among themselves, admitting privately that the B-17 was not simply a plane, it was an ideology in steel, a machine designed to ensure that courage, teamwork, and sheer willpower could triumph where brute force failed. Outside, the war raged on. Berlin was feeling the tremors of Allied bombing raids, fuel shortages slowed production, and morale faltered. Yet, in the quiet corners of Rechlin, these men confronted a paradox. Here lay a captured enemy craft, and instead of giving them advantage, it exposed the futility of their own efforts. The fortress, undamaged by their scrutiny, unbroken by their engines' tests, seemed almost alive, as if mocking them silently. One night, as snow fell thickly and muffled the airfield, von Stetten stood at the nose of the aircraft, staring at the American stars painted beneath layers of gray camouflage. All our calculations, all our inventions, and still she outpaces us in every measure, he whispered to no one in particular. Lerche, standing beside him, nodded, voice low and tremulous. It is as if they built more than a bomber. They built a fortress of men and steel together. They realized then that this was why the Allied bombing campaigns succeeded with such ferocity. It wasn't merely firepower or numbers, it was design, it was strategy, it was the collective courage of crews who trusted each other implicitly, and machines built to ensure that trust translated into survival. The officers began keeping personal logs, sketches of angles, ballistics tables, and gun placement studies, each noting not flaws but marvels. The B-17 could absorb punishment, protect her crew, and keep returning to the sky like a myth come alive.
And in that quiet realization, amidst the snow and the cold engines, they felt something foreign: respect, fear, admiration, and something heavier still, humility, because they understood that the sky was no longer theirs to dominate, that the age of German air supremacy had ended quietly in the form of this single captured aircraft that refused to bend, refused to break, and refused to forgive the arrogance of those who thought they could conquer the air.
Spring arrived over Rechlin, but with it came no warmth for the Luftwaffe officers. The war was closing in on all sides, and the captured B-17 had become a silent teacher, a relentless reminder of what they could never replicate. Day after day, test flights pushed the fortress harder. Sharp climbs, sudden dives, full-power turns, each maneuver revealing not a weakness, but another layer of ingenuity that left the German crews dumbstruck. Von Stetten, once brimming with the confidence that came from flying the Luftwaffe's finest machines, now found himself silently questioning every assumption he'd ever held about bomber design. During one flight, he watched a mock attack unfold from the tail gunner's perspective, tracer rounds lancing through the air, and for the first time truly saw what Allied crews endured: the coordination, the timing, the unbreakable defensive network, each man on the fortress anticipating not just the enemy, but one another. Oberleutnant Lerche leaned over the charts in the cockpit, voice tight, muttering, "No German plane, no formation could survive this." Even the most experienced gunners, veterans of countless raids over England, found themselves humbled, each realizing that raw skill alone could not overcome the machine's design. Back on the ground, engineers attempted calculations, structural analyses, even suggestions for retrofitting German bombers with similar firepower, but every effort failed. The fortress's genius was not in a single element, but in the sum of all parts working together, a harmony of steel, guns, and human coordination. By late afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows over snow-streaked hangars, von Stetten walked alone around the aircraft, placing his gloved hands on the cold fuselage. He traced the seams, the gun mounts, the rivets, and a thought struck him so profoundly that he paused mid-step. All our pride, all our experience, and yet we are children learning from a captured bird. The men inside, outside, and above the aircraft no longer spoke of superiority, tactics, or plans. They whispered of awe, of disbelief, of respect tinged with fear. And when the final log was written after weeks of exhaustive tests, von Stetten scrawled a single line, staring at the cold gray metal as if confessing to it directly. We had never seen defensive firepower like it. It was not just an observation,
but an admission, the culmination of months of wonder, terror, and reluctant admiration. The B-17, silent now on the snow-frosted tarmac, seemed almost aware of the effect she had wrought, as if she understood that in her survival, in her endurance, she had delivered a lesson far greater than any engineer's blueprint or officer's strategy. That the true strength of the American bomber was not measured in tons of steel or horsepower, but in the unity of crew and craft, and in the courage to face the sky together.
By mid-1944, the war had begun to sweep mercilessly over the Reich, and even Rechlin was no longer safe from Allied bombs. Yet the captured B-17 remained, a stubborn sentinel of what the Allies had achieved. Major von Stetten and Oberleutnant Lerche had conducted every conceivable test: day flights, night flights, mock attacks, and simulated evasions, and still the fortress endured, unbowed, unbroken, almost laughing in silence at the futility of German engineering to match her. The officers had come to treat her with a mix of reverence and fear, walking around her cold aluminum skin as if it held secrets too profound to fully comprehend, whispering apologies to the machine they had once thought they could dominate. And on a cold April morning, with frost glinting like diamonds across the runway, von Stetten stood before her one last time, his eyes tracing every gun turret, every rivet, every scar earned in countless simulated battles. And finally, quietly, he spoke into the frozen air. "You were not built to be defeated, and in that you have taught us more than any lecture or blueprint ever could." The war raged outside, but in that frozen field time seemed to stand still. The fortress had survived months of scrutiny, testing, and human obsession, yet she would soon be returned to history, her lessons engraved not just in steel, but in the minds of those who had witnessed her power firsthand. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the hangars, the officers retreated, leaving the B-17 alone in the quiet snow, a monument to courage, design, and unity, knowing that her legacy would outlive the Reich, the war, and even themselves. And so, if you've felt the awe, the tension, and the incredible story of the captured fortress, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and join our channel for more stories that reveal the hidden truths and extraordinary feats of history. Because every aircraft, every soldier, and every moment has a story waiting to be told, just like this one.